it's not just about resources, because as you mentioned, the United States is ascending in the ranks in terms of oil production. They don't have they're not exactly, they don't have a complete shortage of oil. It's not just about that, although that is a part of it. I think another main pillar of this is preventing countries in the Middle East from accessing their own resources. When we look at Syria, Syria is not really a huge oil producer in the world. They don't even rank in the top 10. But for Syria, oil, it counts for 25% of the government revenue if we look at 2010, so just before the war started. So that's enormous. That's a quarter of the government's revenue. You need this for social safety nets, for public funding, for subsidizing food. So now with the sanctions, which you mentioned, for years ISIS has been stealing the oil. They've been selling it to Turkey. Various actors have taken control of it. But right now, with the Caesar Act since 2020, when Trump put that in place, and Biden is of course continuing it, the whole goal is to deny Syria access to its own resources. Iran, for example, you can look at how after the nuclear deal, which it wasn't exactly the best deal, but after the sanctions were lifted, and they didn't lift all of them actually, but they did lift some of them, and you can see how oil exports went up in Iran, and this helped the economy for a bit. And what did Trump do? He comes in and he specifically targets the banking sector, the oil sector, because they want to kneecap Iran's economy. Venezuela sits on the largest oil reserves in the world, and it can't even refine them because it has no infrastructure. It's been decimated by U.S. sanctions. So it's not just about the U.S. needing oil from other countries. It's about preventing countries that it doesn't like from accessing their own oil. And that way it can cripple their economies, their oil-based economies. And it's not just about oil. Of course, they have other exports and resources. And I think, frankly speaking, if we look at Iran, if we look at how they've done under sanctions, they've done remarkably well. Even Cuba, they've found ways to circumvent sanctions. And it's quite exemplary, honestly, because sanctions are siege warfare. It kills people. And so for them to find other ways to mitigate this, to keep their economies going, of course, it's not optimal, but still it indicates a lot of strength. Syria, for example, was self-sufficient, was a net exporter of wheat. And the same regions in Syria, so Hasakeh, Deir ez-Zor, which are in the east and the northeast, they not only contain the oil, the largest oil reserves in Syria, but they also contain, this is the breadbasket region, as it's called. So all the crops are grown here, the major crops. And Syria also doesn't have access to these. So, the sanctions are, again, about preventing Syrians from accessing their own resources, whether it's crops, whether it's cotton, whether it's oil. It doesn't matter. It's about bullying other countries by stealing their resources, holding them hostage, bullying them into, coercing them into accepting whatever policies you're trying to implement on them, regime change, forcing them into the international monetary system, and so on. I think that's really a main function of it.